By the third week of August, every tomato field along the coast had begun to collapse. The soil was wet, the leaves were still green, yet the plants sagged from their stakes, as if something beneath the ground had cut their throats. Farmers dragged hoses through the mud and poured more water around the roots, but the vines only wilted faster. When they split the dying stems, the pale tissue inside had turned brown. When they pulled the plants from the soil, the roots were swollen with hard knots. By noon, entire rows lay flat. Trucks moved slowly between the farms, carrying dead plants toward burn piles. Men who had spent 20 years growing tomatoes stood silently beside fields they could no longer save. Then the road reached Elias Ward's property. His land had always been considered the worst in the village. A narrow strip of sandy ground pressed between the sea and the processing sheds. For months, the fishing crews had dumped shrimp heads and crab shells along his shoreline. The smell had been so strong that people covered their faces whenever they passed. But now, inside Elias's fence, most of the tomato plants were still standing. Some leaves had yellowed, a few vines had wilted. Yet the rows remained green, heavy with fruit, their stems firm beneath the morning sun. Small white pieces of shrimp shell still glittered across the dark soil. A crowd gathered at the gate. Silas Crow pushed through them, stepped into the field, and broke a branch from the nearest plant. Clear sap beaded along the wound. "What did you spray on them?" he demanded. Elias looked past him toward the brown fields surrounding the village. Then he glanced down at the soil Silas's own trucks had once buried beneath rotting waste. "Nothing," Elias said, "that you didn't give me." And beneath their boots, the ground smelled not of dead shrimp, but of rain. Elias Ward had inherited 3 things from his father: a weather-beaten house, 7 acres of sand, and a debt large enough to take both away. The land lay between the fishing village and the open sea, where salt winds scorched young leaves, and every hard rain carried another thin layer of soil toward the shore. Water disappeared almost as quickly as Elias poured it down. His father had spent 20 years trying to tame the place. He planted beans, melons, and corn, but the harvests stayed small while the debts grew larger. After the funeral, Elias found an old notebook beside the kitchen window. Its pages were filled with rainfall dates, tide marks, route sketches, and notes from a closed agricultural station, where a young technician named Mara Bell had once tested the soil. On the final page, his father had underlined one sentence twice: "The soil changes where the tide leaves something behind." Elias did not understand it. What he understood was the bank notice folded beneath it. Payment was due on October 1st. If Elias missed it, the bank would begin foreclosure before winter. He chose tomatoes because they could produce income within 1 season. The first planting grew pale and weak. The second looked promising, until hard knots appeared along the roots. By midsummer, the plants wilted even when the soil was wet, and the fruit remained too small to sell. Neighbors told Elias the land was exhausted. Some said it had never been farmland at all. Then Silas Crow arrived with an offer. He stood at the edge of the field in polished boots, looking toward the shoreline where he wanted to build a cold storage warehouse. "You have 6 weeks before the bank takes this place," Silas said. "Sell now, and at least you leave with something." Elias closed his father's notebook. "No." Silas glanced toward the sea. "Then let the coast make the decision." 3 nights later, Elias woke to the sound of a truck moving without headlights. The first truck came without headlights. Elias heard the engine grinding along the coastal road shortly after midnight. By the time he reached the fence, the rear gate had already opened. Shrimp heads spilled onto the sand in a wet, gray-red avalanche. Broken shells followed, then crab legs, fish scraps, and buckets of black water from the processing floor. The smell struck Elias hard enough to make him step back. A second truck arrived before dawn. By sunrise, gulls covered the shoreline. Flies gathered in dark clouds. Stray dogs tore through the piles and dragged rotting pieces toward the irrigation ditch. Elias found Silas standing beside the road, watching the tide crawl toward the waste. "You cannot leave this here." Silas shrugged. "The sea has carried scraps through this cove for generations." This did not come from the sea. Silas looked toward the processing sheds. New disposal rules had made every barrel of waste more expensive to remove. Elias's shoreline offered him a cheaper solution and a way to make the land unbearable before the bank's October deadline. "The tide will take it," Silas said. But the tide did not. It lifted the lighter shells and pushed them farther onto Elias's property. Wind carried the odor through his house. Customers reached the gate, covered their mouths, and turned away. For 6 nights, more trucks came. While clearing the ditch, Elias drove his shovel beneath one of the fresh piles. The blade struck a buried layer of old shells, bleached, brittle remains deposited by storms and scattered dumping over many years. The sand beneath them was different, brown, crumbly, cool. It held together when Elias squeezed it. Rotted seaweed, leaves, and splintered wood had mixed between the shells until the layer smelled not of decay, but damp earth. Then he noticed a green stem rising through it. A tomato plant. It had survived without irrigation, fertilizer, or shelter from the salt wind. Elias touched the soil around its roots. Even beneath the afternoon sun, it was still moist. Elias returned to the wild tomato before sunrise. The plant had no stake, no irrigation line, and no shelter from the salt wind. Yet its stem was thicker than those in his field, and its leaves remained firm while the cultivated rows were already curling in the heat. He pressed his fingers into the ground beside it. The surface felt dry, but 2 inches below, the soil was cool and moist. Old shrimp shells crumbled between his fingertips. Beneath them lay decayed seaweed, leaves, and splintered wood packed into a dark layer that held together instead of falling apart like sand. Elias dug carefully around the roots. They spread through the old material in a dense white network. A few carried small swellings, but nothing like the hard knots deforming the roots in his field. He opened his father's notebook. The soil changes where the tide leaves something behind. For the first time, the sentence seemed less like a mystery than a clue. Elias filled 2 buckets with the dark soil and brittle shells. Then he looked toward the fresh heaps Silas's trucks had left along the shore. He saw the same material in 2 different stages, but with October approaching and the bank waiting, he noticed only the part he wanted to believe. If old shrimp waste had improved the sand, fresh waste should work faster. By noon, he had dug trenches beside 3 rows of tomatoes. He poured in shrimp heads, crushed shells, and crab scraps, then covered them with soil. The smell rose immediately. Still, Elias imagined stronger roots, heavier fruit, and enough money to stop the foreclosure. That evening, the plants looked unchanged. The next morning, their lower leaves began to yellow. By the 3rd day, several vines had collapsed. Elias pulled one from the ground. The buried waste beneath it was hot, wet, and black. A sharp cloud of ammonia struck his face. The old shoreline had taken years to build living soil. Elias had tried to force the same transformation in 3 days. By the end of the week, all 3 treated rows were dying. The yellowing had climbed from the lower leaves into the canopy. Stems softened. Green fruit stopped swelling. Whenever Elias watered, the ground released a sour, chemical odor that clung to his clothes and drifted toward the village. At night, stray dogs tore open the trenches. By morning, shrimp heads lay scattered between the plants, covered in flies. Elias tried burying the scraps again, but the soil beneath them had become slick and airless. The fresh waste was not turning into the dark material beneath the wild tomato. It was rotting faster than the roots could escape. Silas arrived with several fishermen and watched Elias pull another plant from the ground. "October is getting closer," Silas called. "Has the bank agreed to accept dead tomatoes?" The roots were brown and brittle. When Elias split one open, the tissue looked burned. That afternoon, a county officer inspected the drainage ditch. Black liquid had begun seeping from the trenches toward the coast. "If this reaches the water," she warned, "you will pay for the cleanup." After she left, Elias found another envelope nailed to his door. Final payment notice. For the first time, Silas's offer no longer seemed impossible. Then Maribel walked into the field. She recognized Elias's father's notebook beneath his arm before she recognized him. Years earlier, she had helped record soil samples from the same shoreline. Mara knelt beside the trench, lifted a handful of black material, and smelled it. "No air," she said. "Too wet. Too much nitrogen. The old shells made soil. The old shells were not alone." She pointed toward the wild tomato. Beneath it were leaves, rotted wood, seaweed, and years of exposure to air. "You buried decay," she said. "Nature built compost." Elias looked across the dying rows. The shells were not the mistake. His process was. And every failure he recorded, might become the only thing standing between his farm and foreclosure. The next morning, Elias dug every shrimp head from the failed trenches. He spread the waste across an empty patch of ground instead of burying it again. Mara said little. She only pointed toward the wild tomato patch and asked him to list what the old shells had been mixed with. Elias wrote the answer in his notebook: dry leaves, rotted wood, seaweed, air, time. At an abandoned boat shed, he found piles of sawdust beneath the workbenches. He hauled it home with straw and fallen leaves, then built his first compost pile in layers: wet shrimp waste, dry carbon, crushed shells, more straw. Within 3 days, the center became hot enough to steam when Elias opened it. The smell remained, but it had changed. He pushed a metal rod into the pile each morning and recorded how warm it felt. When the odor turned sour, he added sawdust and opened the pile with a fork. When the material dried and stopped heating, he added water. The first batch became slimy, the second went cold. The third attracted gulls because he left scraps exposed. Elias wrote down every mistake instead of hiding it. Too wet, too dry, not enough air, too much fresh waste. Each failed pile made the next one better. Weeks passed. The shrimp heads lost their shape. The black runoff stopped reaching the ditch. Flies disappeared beneath a thick cover of straw. Brittle shell fragments crumbled when Elias squeezed them. Then one morning, he opened the oldest pile. No ammonia burned his nose. No smell of dead seafood clung to his hands. The material was dark, loose, and warm, with thin white threads running through it. Mara crouched beside him. "What changed?" she asked. Elias looked at the pile, then at the notes covering his hands. "Not the shells," he said, "the conditions around them." For the first time since the bank's final notice arrived, he was no longer racing October blindly. He was building a process he could repeat. Mara brought 1 jar of Elias's finished compost to the abandoned agricultural station inland. Most of the rooms had been stripped years ago, but a microscope still sat beneath a canvas cover. She placed a dark crumb beneath the lens. "Tell me what you see." Elias leaned closer. The compost was not dead. Thin threads crossed broken shell fragments. Pale branching filaments formed tangled colonies. Tiny shapes moved through spaces that looked empty to the naked eye. "Something is living on the shells," he said. Mara opened an old field manual and turned it toward him. One word had been circled beside a drawing of a shrimp shell: chitin. Elias remembered the brittle fragments running through his compost. "What breaks it down?" Mara nodded toward the microscope. "That is the question." He read further. Some bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes produced enzymes capable of cutting chitin into smaller pieces. By feeding the pile shell after shell, Elias had not created those organisms. He had created conditions that favored them. He looked again through the lens. "I didn't add an army," he said. "No, I fed one." Mara turned several pages and showed him an enlarged image of a nematode egg. Its protective layers were not the same as a shrimp shell, but part of their structure also involved chitin. Elias studied the image. If microbes can break shell, they might weaken other chitin-containing structures, Mara said. Might. She closed the book. A mechanism is not proof. Elias thought of the wild tomato, the burned roots, the failed piles, and the final notice still hanging beside his door. He had 6 weeks left. Mara placed 2 wooden stakes on the table, one painted red and one white. Same seed, same water, same soil. "One bed gets ordinary compost," Elias said, "and the other? The shell compost." Mara slid the stakes toward him. "If one survives," she said, "you will still need to prove why." Elias picked them up. For the first time, he was not chasing a miracle. He was designing a test. Elias chose the flattest section of his remaining field and divided it into 2 equal beds. Each held 20 tomato seedlings from the same seed batch. He planted them on the same morning, spaced them evenly, and ran 1 irrigation line between the rows. The white stake bed received ordinary compost. The red stake bed received the finished shell compost. Elias measured each portion instead of guessing. Same amount of water, same mulch, same planting depth, same hours of sunlight. The seedlings cost nearly everything he had left. When the bank clerk came for the overdue payment, Elias handed him only a fraction of what he owed. "You have until October 1st, the the clerk said. After that, the foreclosure begins. Elias watched him leave, then returned to the field. Every morning he recorded plant height, leaf count, soil moisture, midday wilting, and new flowers. He resisted every urge to give the weaker bed extra water. For 2 weeks, the plants looked almost identical. The red-stake tomatoes were not taller. Their leaves were not greener. They produced no more flowers. Silas stopped beside the fence. "You spent your last money proving dirt is dirt." Elias wondered whether he was right. Then 3 days of dry wind were followed by sudden heat. By noon, both beds sagged. At sunrise the next morning, most plants beside the red stake had lifted their leaves again. Several in the white bed remained limp. Elias wrote down the difference but drew no conclusion. A week later, he removed 3 weakened plants from each bed. The white bed roots carried more swollen knots. The red bed roots were not clean, but they had more fine white growth around the damaged areas. Mara studied them. "Promising," she said, "not proof." 3 mornings later, a white bed plant collapsed, although the soil beneath it was wet. By evening, 4 more had fallen. Their leaves remained green. Something inside the stems had quietly stopped the water from rising. Mara arrived before sunrise. Elias had already pulled 5 collapsed plants from the white stake bed. Their roots were damp, and the soil around them still held water. Yet the vines lay across the ground as though they had not been watered for weeks. "This is not drought," Elias said. He cut through the lowest part of one stem. The pale tissue inside had turned brown. Mara handed him a clear glass of water. Elias lowered the cut end beneath the surface. Within minutes, faint cloudy threads began drifting from the stem like smoke. Mara watched carefully. "It looks like bacterial wilt," she said. But a field test is not a laboratory result. The likely bacteria had entered through the roots and multiplied inside the vessels carrying water upward. The ground could remain wet while the plant slowly died of thirst. Elias looked toward the red stake bed. "Why are most of those still standing?" "Standing does not mean safe." They pulled 3 plants from each bed. The white bed roots carried heavy knots and small wounds across the damaged tissue. The red bed roots were not clean, but the swelling was less severe, and fine white roots continued growing around the scars. Elias opened the field manual from the agricultural station. He found the section on chitin fragments and plant defense. "They recognize the fragments as danger," he said. "Under some conditions," Mara replied. "The signal may prepare them. It does not make them invincible." A plant beside the red stake already had 1 yellowing branch. Elias marked it in his notebook. Then the church bell rang across the village. A boy came running down the coastal road, breathless and covered in mud. 3 farms north of Elias had lost entire rows overnight. Their plants had wilted while the soil was still wet. Mara looked toward the dark clouds gathering beyond the sea. Warm rain was expected for the next 7 days. Elias closed his notebook. Whatever had entered his test bed was no longer contained inside it. The warm rain began on Sunday night. By morning, water stood between the tomato rows. Mud washed from one field into another, clinging to boots, tools, and tractor tires. Farmers dragged wilted plants toward the road, leaving infected roots exposed beside the drainage channels. Then the heat returned. The village began turning brown 1 row at a time. Plants that appeared healthy at breakfast collapsed before evening. Their leaves remained green, but their stems bent against the stakes. Farmers poured more water around the roots, sprayed the foliage, and blamed the seed company. Nothing stopped the spread. Elias walked both test beds at sunrise and sunset. The white stake bed declined quickly. More stems showed brown tissue. 12 of the 20 plants were dead or severely wilted. The red stake bed was not untouched. 2 plants had collapsed, several leaves had yellowed. But most vines remained upright, and damaged plants continued producing fine roots beyond the swollen knots. Elias recorded every loss. He did not write immune, he wrote numbers. Silas appeared at the fence while Elias examined a sick red bed plant. "You call that protection?" Silas asked. Elias pointed toward the neighboring fields, where flattened vines lay in muddy rows. "No," he said. "I call it a difference." By Friday, that difference was visible from the coastal road. Crowds gathered outside Elias's gate, no longer laughing. Some farmers asked for compost. Others asked what he had sprayed. Elias refused to promise them anything. His oldest pile was small. The newer piles were still hot and unfinished. Using them too early could destroy the very crops they were meant to protect. That night, Elias opened another letter from the bank. 12 days remained before foreclosure. Then he heard movement outside. Through the window, he saw Silas filling a burlap sack from the oldest finished pile. Elias watched him disappear into the rain. Silas had stolen the right material, but he had no idea how little one sack could do, or what desperation would make him mix with it. By sunrise, Silas had spread the stolen finished compost around the healthiest plants on his farm. One sack covered less than a single row. He still had 6 acres collapsing beneath warm, infected soil, a processing contract he could not afford to lose, and workers asking whether they would be paid after harvest. So Silas tried to stretch what he had stolen. He mixed the dark compost with fresh shrimp heads from the processing shed, buried the mixture against living roots, and soaked it with water until black liquid ran between the rows. By afternoon, the smell returned. By the second day, heat rose from the soil. Flies gathered over the beds. White fungal growth appeared beside exposed scraps. Several plants wilted faster than before, and the roots nearest the fresh waste turned soft and brown. Silas drove to Elias's farm carrying the empty sack. "You gave the village rotten dirt," he shouted. "I gave you nothing," Elias said. "You used the same shells. The shells were only the beginning." Elias led him past 3 compost piles. The newest was sharp-smelling and hot. The middle pile released steam when opened. The oldest was cool, dark, and nearly odorless. "One sack could not save your farm," Elias said, "so you mixed a finished process with fresh waste and called them the same thing. Fresh scraps needed dry carbon, air, controlled moisture, repeated turning, and weeks of decomposition. Finished compost could support soil only when used carefully. It could not reverse an advanced outbreak overnight." Silas stared at the piles. For a moment, Elias saw fear beneath his anger. Then Silas turned that fear into accusation. That afternoon, he gathered farmers beside the road and claimed Elias's waste operation had caused the outbreak. Before sunset, a county truck arrived. The inspector sealed the compost area and ordered Elias to stop using or receiving material until testing was complete. 12 days remained before foreclosure. Now the compost that might save his farm stood behind warning tape. The inspectors returned at sunrise with gloves, sample bags, cameras, and a county engineer. They began at the drainage ditch. Elias showed them the straw filter he had built after his first failed trenches, the covered receiving area for fresh waste, and the separate zone where finished compost had been stored before Silas's complaint. Then the engineer drove a shovel into the ground beside the oldest pile. Dark liquid appeared beneath the surface. Silas stepped forward. "There," he said. "That is what poisoned the village." For one terrible moment, Elias thought he was right. Then Elias opened his notebook. The location matched the trench from his first failed experiment, the one he had recorded, isolated, and stopped using weeks earlier. The liquid had not come from the finished compost pile. It remained trapped beneath the abandoned pit. "I made that mistake," Elias said, "and I marked where it happened." The inspectors photographed the site and collected separate samples from the old trench, the active piles, the drainage ditch, both test beds, and several diseased stems. They compared the compost stages. The newest pile was hot and sharp-smelling. The middle pile still released steam. The oldest was cool, dark, and nearly odorless. At the test beds, they counted dead plants and examined the roots. The red stake bed was not healthy by ordinary standards, but it had fewer collapsed plants, more fine roots, and less severe galling than the white bed. The lead inspector sealed every sample. "We can measure the difference," she said. "We cannot yet explain it." Until the laboratory results returned, Elias was forbidden to move, sell, or apply any compost. As the inspectors left, a bank officer arrived at the gate. He nailed a foreclosure notice beneath the warning tape. 7 days remained. Elias stood between the sealed piles and the paper taking his land away. For the first time, the truth was being tested faster than he could afford to wait. The 7 days passed without a laboratory report. On the morning foreclosure was scheduled to begin, 6 farmers arrived at Elias's gate. Their own fields were nearly dead, but they placed small deposits on Compost Elias was still forbidden to sell. The money was not enough to clear the debt. It was enough to buy 30 more days. 3 weeks later, a joint report arrived from the County Extension Office and the State Agricultural Laboratory. Silas gathered the village outside the processing shed and read the first result aloud. Bacterial wilt detected in both test beds. A murmur moved through the crowd. His soil is infected, Silas said. The shells cured nothing. Mara took the report from his hand. You stopped at the first page. The pathogen had not disappeared. Elias's compost had not sterilized the soil, and the red stake plants had never been immune. But the beds had not responded equally. 12 of 20 plants in the white bed had died or severely wilted. Only 3 in the red bed had suffered the same damage. Root examinations showed less severe nematode galling and more fine root growth around injured tissue. The state laboratory also found a stronger presence of keton-degrading microbial groups in the amended soil. Plant tissue from the red bed showed higher activity in several defense-related enzymes. The report did not claim one organism had saved the crop. It described a system. Organic matter improved the sand around the roots. Chitin favored organisms able to break it down. Some competed with pathogens or weakened vulnerable pest stages. Smaller chitin fragments may also have prepared the plants to respond faster. The disease was still there, Mara said. It simply had less control. Silas looked at Elias. So they were never immune? No, Elias replied. He looked toward the surviving vines. They were ready. A farmer removed his cap. How much can you make? Elias glanced at the sealed piles. Not enough. The village's problem was no longer disbelief. It was demand. The county removed the warning tape 2 days after the report was approved. By noon, carts were already waiting outside Elias's gate. Farmers brought straw, leaves, sawdust, and deposits for compost that did not yet exist. Fishing crews arrived with baskets of shrimp shells and dripping barrels from the processing sheds. Elias rejected the first 3 loads. One contained plastic rope, another smelled of diesel, a third had been soaked in concentrated brine. If dirty material enters the pile, he said, dirty material leaves it. So he wrote rules before accepting another shell. Fresh waste had to be separated from fuel, plastic, and processing chemicals. Every load would be weighed, dated, and marked by source. Shells and heads would enter a covered receiving area. Finished compost would remain isolated from anything raw. Then Elias added the rule that changed the balance of power. The processing sheds would pay a disposal fee. Silas arrived carrying his own contract. You should be grateful, he said. We are giving you the material. You gave me waste when you wanted my land, Elias replied. Now you are asking me to manage a liability. He placed a new agreement on the table. Collection fees, contamination penalties, delivery schedules, the right to reject any load. Silas read the final conditions. No dumping, no mixed waste, no shortcuts. Outside, the same truck that had once emptied shrimp heads onto Elias's shore waited with its rear gate closed. The driver held a delivery ticket and could not unload without permission. Silas signed. The farmer's deposits and the first disposal payments covered the overdue interest. The processing contract allowed Elias to refinance the remaining debt before the bank's 30-day extension expired. The land was no longer entering foreclosure. By harvest season, Elias was selling more than tomatoes. He sold finished compost, healthy seedlings, and plans for rebuilding damaged soil. The village had spent years paying to throw the shells away. Now every load had value, and Elias was the one who decided whether it was clean enough to enter his land. By the following spring, the shoreline no longer smelled of rot. Covered bins stood where shrimp heads had once been dumped beneath darkness. Straw and sawdust were stacked under a new roof. Every compost pile carried a wooden marker showing when it had been built, turned, cooled, and cleared for use. Elias's fields were green again, not untouched. A few plants still wilted. Some roots still developed small knots. Whenever disease appeared, Elias removed infected vines, cleaned his tools, rotated the beds, and recorded every loss. The shell compost had not replaced careful farming. It had given careful farming stronger ground to work with. Farmers now arrived carrying soil samples instead of empty promises. They asked how long a pile had matured, how much their fields could safely receive, and what else had to change before planting. Even Silas followed the rules. One afternoon, Mara met Elias beside the place where the wild tomato had once grown through the old shells. She carried his father's notebook. "The soil changes where the tide leaves something behind," she read. Elias looked toward the covered receiving area, where a truck waited for permission to unload. Only when someone pays attention to what happens afterward. At the end of harvest, Elias returned to the same spot and lifted a tomato plant from the soil. The roots were scarred. One small swelling marked an old attack. Several darker branches had died, but around them, hundreds of fine white roots had grown into the compost-rich earth. Elias lowered the plant so the children working beside the piles could see it. He did not call it immune. He did not call it a miracle. He simply pointed to the new roots growing around the damage. The village had tried to bury him beneath what it considered worthless. Instead, the shells had taught the soil how to answer an attack. And beneath the scars, it was already growing again.